Namaste. My name is Vivek Maru, and I started Namathi alongside Marlon Manuel and justice leaders from all over. And in today's session, I want to introduce what we mean by combining the power of people with the power of law. In particular, I want to do two things. I want to describe how it's possible to fuse legal knowledge and legal strategy into the process of organizing to build community power. And secondly, I want to talk about what we call the legal empowerment cycle, which is about knowing law, using law, and shaping law. This is Maqbele. It is a rainforest region in eastern Sierra Leone. And in 2012, a European oil palm company managed to secure a lease agreement for 75,000 acres of rainforest for 50 years for only $2 an acre per year, without the consent of the 22,000 people who live and depend on that land. Maqbele is not the only place where things like this go down. I was part of an international task force on justice, and we looked at data from over 100 countries, and we estimated that worldwide 5.1 billion people live with grave injustices that they cannot remedy. These are people whose lands are being stolen from them or destroyed, people who face ethnic or gender or racial discrimination, people who are being denied access to essential services like basic health care or education. And on top of all of that, we are living with the pandemic, with the climate emergency, and with serious threats to democracy itself. The scale of injustice can be overwhelming. I feel overwhelmed at times. What can we do about it? Combine the power of people with the power of law. This is Mrs. Mita Moinia Jallo. She was born and raised in Maqbele, and she has known disaster before. In the 1990s, during Sierra Leone's civil war, Mrs. Jallo fled with her family to Guinea. And when she heard about this lease agreement, she said, I didn't want to become a refugee again. I didn't want to lose my home. And so despite never having been to school, despite not knowing how to read, Mrs. Jallo fought back. She got organized. She organized a residents association, and that crew reached out to a pair of community paralegals named Tommy Abdullahi and Bendu Koroma. What are community paralegals? Community paralegals are organizers who have knowledge of law and the workings of government, and who help people to use that information to pursue practical solutions. And so Mrs. Jallo, Tommy, Bendu, the Residents Association, they sat down, they did some analysis, and they found that the lease agreement was clearly in violation of Sierra Leonean land law. And armed with that information, the community demonstrated en masse. They confronted the company regularly. They invoked law with specificity and with authority. And after a year and a half of this, the company backed down. Faced with the prospect of mass non-cooperation and the prospect of litigation, the company acknowledged that that lease agreement, that piece of paper they had, was not valid. Mrs. Jallo's community has a partnership with the Gola National Rainforest Park, and they are looking to expand that partnership now that they've been able to beat back the attempted land grab by the oil palm company. Mrs. Jallo said to me, I want to find a way of flourishing, a way of developing that involves stewarding our lands rather than destroying them. And she said, I learned through this process that no one can take my land, no one can bend my hand. I learned my rights. That is the difference that law and organizing can make. And I want to zoom out a little bit to sort of characterize the contrast between a law and organizing approach and the way law has functioned traditionally in society. Traditionally, law has been dominated by elites, lawyers in particular. Law and organizing means putting ordinary people in the driver's seat. Traditionally, law has focused on highly technical channels, so technical that they're often impossible to understand. Law and organizing means demystifying those channels, making them accessible, and then using them in tandem with other tools like nonviolent direct action. Traditionally, law has often been distant from and sometimes outright exploitative of communities who are affected. Law and organizing, in contrast, has an unrelenting focus on building power among communities facing harm. Every struggle like the one that Mrs. Jallo was a part of is vital. Every struggle against injustice like that is vital. But as a movement, we can't stop with struggles like those. We need to build even further. We need to move even further towards fundamental changes in the laws and systems that make the injustice possible. Mrs. Jallow today, she is part of a movement of people from across Sierra Leone who are pushing for a new land law that would grant every community across the country the right to free, prior, informed consent over any industrial activity on their territory. The new law would also ban industrial activity in old-growth forests and ecologically sensitive zones. The new law would empower local land use committees and mandate that those committees be made up of by at least 30% women. This new law, it didn't come out of nowhere. It grew directly out of a decade of grassroots struggles against land grabs, against pollution that were waged by paralegals and communities. And this is what we call the legal empowerment cycle. Communities can understand and use existing rules, no matter how imperfect those rules are, to take on lived immediate threats against their rights, against their lives, against their livelihoods. And then people can come together across many cases like that to pursue better rules. And in particular, there are two very powerful things that grow out of grassroots struggles that can help with the pursuit of systemic change: learning and leadership. What I mean by learning is that many cases like Mrs. Jallow's offer a portrait of how a system is working in practice. And that is information that often nobody else has. It can show you how a system is failing, where it's breaking down, and it can help you envision how a system could get better. And what I mean by leadership is that the starting point is one of disaffection and sometimes even one of fear. And this process of learning and using existing rules to take part in a battle, in a fight against a lived immediate harm, that process can be a journey through which people grow their own sense of agency, their confidence, their ability to stand up for their community and also for everyone, for a system that works for everyone. And we have seen in several different places that it is possible to grow, to draw on the learning and the leadership from grassroots struggles, to then fight for and win major fundamental changes in laws and systems. The reason we call it a cycle and not a one-way street is that if you do get a law passed, or if you do win a new policy commitment, those things don't typically implement themselves. They become new levers and hooks which communities and paralegals can bring into the process of solving concrete problems, and thereby breathe life into those new commitments, insist on their implementation. It's not a one-way street, it's a wheel. And there are people all around the world fighting hard to turn this wheel as we speak. Admittedly, it doesn't always go the way I just described, and there are countries where the conditions are so repressive that no matter how organized communities are, it's going to be difficult to achieve changes in laws and policies using this grassroots approach. But we can't give up on that possibility. We have got to play the long game. We have got to stay in the fight. I take inspiration from South Africa, where community paralegals first emerged in the 1950s as part of the struggle against apartheid. South African people, they fought for decades before they won against apartheid in 1994. And there are paralegals and communities in South Africa to this day who are working to fulfill the promise of South Africa's democratic constitution. This pathway of knowing law, using law, and shaping law, of blending law and organizing, this pathway is one that all of us, everyone, can walk. It is a crucial part of how we confront massive challenges like climate change and violence and poverty. It is also part of how collectively we can deepen democracy. And I look forward to walking this pathway with all of you.